If wood were as fragile as modern construction makes it seem, Viking society would not have survived. These people built ships that crossed open oceans, halls that stood through centuries of storms, and working harbours in some of the wettest, coldest regions on Earth. Their wood endured without chemical preservatives, pressure treatment, or synthetic sealants. This was not accidental. Vikings followed a disciplined system that treated wood as a living material with predictable weaknesses. They did not try to overpower nature. They shaped their methods around it. Stay with this explanation, because once you understand the logic behind it, modern wood failure starts to look less like bad luck and more like bad design. Why Vikings assumed wood would fail unless actively protected. Vikings never assumed wood was durable on its own. In their world, rot, insects and moisture were constant threats. Because of this, preservation was not an afterthought applied at the end. It was built into every stage of wood's life, beginning long before construction. This mindset alone separated them from many modern approaches. Instead of trusting coatings and treatments, they focused on eliminating the conditions that allow decay to thrive. You know, choosing the right tree really mattered more than any treatment that came later. The Viking method, well, it all began right there in the forest. Trees were selected with great care, always favouring slow-grown timber with a tight grain. Dense grain, you see, limits how easily water can travel through the wood, and that directly slows decay. Equally important, honestly, was the timing. Trees were often felled in winter when sap levels were at their lowest. Sap contains sugars, and, well, sugars feed fungi. By reducing sap content from the very start, the Vikings removed a primary food source for those pesky rot organisms. So, to apply this today, it's best to prioritize dense lumber, steer clear of overly fast-grown wood, and remember that internal structure matters far more than just surface appearance. You know, seasoning wood was really treated as essential, not just some optional step. Fresh-cut wood, well, it was never rushed into service. Viking timber was seasoned slowly, carefully stacked off the ground, with plenty of space for air to move freely around each piece. Honestly, this process could take many months or even longer, depending on what the timber was meant for. Slow seasoning, it actually prevented those deep cracks from forming. Cracks, you see, trap water, and trapped water eventually causes rot. The Vikings, they understood this through experience, even if they didn't have the modern words for it. These days, applying this knowledge is pretty simple, though it's often ignored. Just elevate your wood off the soil, protect it from direct rain, allow for some airflow, and give it the time it needs to stabilize before you use it. Controlled charring, you know, permanently changed the wood's surface in fascinating ways. One of the most effective Viking techniques was actually light surface charring. Now, this was not about burning wood into charcoal. Not at all. Rather, it was controlled exposure to flame, followed by brushing away any loose carbon. Charring closed surface pores, reduced capillary water absorption, destroyed fungal spores and, well, discouraged insects. And unlike paint, it never peeled. Unlike sealants, it never trapped moisture inside, which is quite remarkable. To apply this today, you simply lightly char exposed surfaces until they're evenly darkened, brush them clean, and leave the wood breathable. But, structural integrity must always be preserved. Oils, you see, only worked because the Vikings used them properly. They relied on natural oils, which they got from fish, animals and plants. But, oil was never their main line of defence for preserving wood. It was always applied after the wood had been thoroughly dried, and quite often after the surface had been charred. The oil would seep into the wood fibres, and, it slowed down water absorption, but it didn't seal the wood completely airtight. This clever approach meant the wood could resist sudden soaking during storms, yet still have the chance to dry out afterward. These days, if you want to use oil properly, just warm up some natural oil a bit, then apply it in thin coats to dry wood. And, you should stop once the wood stops soaking it up. Putting on thick layers on the surface really defeats the whole purpose. Viking construction made treatments almost unnecessary. Preservation did not rely on surface treatment alone. Viking structures were designed to shed water aggressively and dry quickly. Roofs were steep and overhangs were generous. Timber was always lifted clear of bare earth. Posts rested on stone and deckboards were spaced. Ship planks overlapped to direct water away instantly. Water was expected to arrive, but the system ensured it never stayed. You can actually apply this by elevating wood off the ground, increasing roof overhangs, and eliminating flat surfaces where moisture pools. So, why did Viking joinery resist decay better than, modern fasteners? Well, Vikings actually avoided using too much metal, since it tends to attract condensation and can create these hidden rot zones. Instead, they relied on joinery that could move along with the wood itself. Wooden pegs, for example, would swell up when wet, tightening the joints naturally. And when things dried out, those pegs would relax without cracking the surrounding fibres. So any movement was absorbed rather than, resisted. Modern builders can actually learn from this by designing joints that, drain and breathe instead of sealing them up rigidly. So, why did repeated exposure actually strengthen Viking wood instead of, destroying it? Well, when wood is allowed to dry fully after each wetting, it actually becomes more stable over time. The fibres start to align, internal stresses sort of equalise, and, interestingly enough, the strength of the wood increases. But this whole process only happens when drying is absolutely guaranteed. Viking systems were designed so that no storm ever left the wood wet for long, ensuring it could always recover and grow stronger. Modern sealed systems often prevent this, turning each wetting into cumulative damage. Why this method still matters today. Climate extremes are increasing. Moisture cycles are becoming harsher. The Viking approach remains relevant because it accepts reality instead of fighting it with fragile barriers. Wood that can get wet and dry safely will always outlast wood that depends on perfect sealing. If this guide helped you understand how Vikings made wood last without chemicals, Subscribe to Backyard Wisdom for more grounded, practical history that still works today. Share this with anyone building, repairing, or relying on wood to endure far beyond a single lifetime.